Hey, what's up? It's Trent from Marmalade Cream Media, and welcome to another podcast tip of the week. Today, I was working on a bumper for a client, and I thought this might be a good opportunity for me to just share how I like to mix these. So, what I mean by bumper is that you've got a music track, and I've got a voiceover track, and this is going to be essentially the intro of the podcast. So, I guess technically the music is the bumper. It's bumper music, and then there's a voiceover track that we're going to lay on top of that. And the whole thing together is going to comprise the intro to this podcast. So let's talk about the basic structure of this thing real quick. I've got my two tracks here that we're going to be working with. Let me make these bigger so we can see them clearly. Okay, so I've got a music track here on the top track, and I've got a voiceover bit here, and I've already lined up the voiceover to where I want it to appear relative to the music. So we're going to have a music, it's going to hit for a couple seconds, voiceover is going to come in, and then the music's going to play on for a few seconds after the voiceover is done. And so that's what this tail is after the voiceover. Now, I'm leaving quite a bit of tail here. I'm going to let it play out for several seconds. We're not going to use all of that. I'm going to start fading out the music somewhere around there. So there's going to be voiceover ends and then a few seconds of music playing after that, and then it's going to fade out. So the whole thing's going to be 13 to 15 seconds long, let's say. But I'm giving myself plenty of tail because I'm going to render this whole thing down as one mixed intro, music and voiceover together. It's all going to be mixed down. I'm going to have this nice long tail here. And when I insert this into a new project, I can decide where that fade needs to be. So I'm not going to do the fade yet. I'm going to leave that for later because I'm going to want to finesse where the fade out occurs and where the main body of the podcast is going to start. So, we'll just leave that for later because I might want to change it. And it might change slightly from episode to episode. So that's the basic structure here. The other thing that's important to note is that when I'm choosing music, this came from a music library. When I'm choosing music, first of all, it's driven by style. This is something that the client wanted, something that has kind of a hip hop, West Coast, Dr. Dre feel to it. But when I'm choosing what part of the music track to use, I want something that doesn't have a lot of heavy rhythmic elements up front. In general, sometimes it works, right? The music just kind of is what it is. But if I can find a spot that's a little bit more sparse, then I'll start with that and have the voiceover play over the more sparse part of the track, and then I look for a drop. So that's kind of what we have here is we've got this piano motif, and then we've got a drop. Now, the piano motif in the full track of music played for I think it was 8 bars or 4 bars. No, it was four bars before the drop hit. Well, that's too long. So what I did is I made a cut here, and I took I cut it down to 2 bars of piano, and then the drop where the drums kick in, and there's more stuff going on. So that's the basic structure of this, and I think it's important to kind of make that work first before you start doing any mixing, because if the structure is right, then it's going to already fit around the voiceover nicely. So let's just listen to what I have now. So here's just a music track. There's that drop, and it'll fade out somewhere at this point. But there's a tail that I left on it. Okay, all right, there's the music track, and then here's the voiceover that we're going to drop over the beginning piano motif.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength in Skaneateles, New York.
And you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
Okay, there we go. There's the voiceover bit. Now, here's the problem if you just play them on one on top of another, right? So I'm just going to hit play with both tracks going now.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength in Skaneateles, New York.
And you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
Okay, right? So you can hear both parts. You can hear the music, you can hear the voiceover, but the voiceover is kind of buried, right? You can't hear it clearly over the music. They're fighting each other. And so what we need to do is we need to mix the music track so that it comes down while the voiceover is playing. That way the voiceover cuts through nice and loud and clear. Now, what you'll see a lot of times is you will see a mix where basically someone just hammers the volume down of the music. So the music's playing, voiceover comes in, the music goes way down, like down 12, 15, 20 dB, and then the voiceover plays, and then the voiceover stops and the music, wham, comes right back up to full volume. And it works, right? That kind of style of mixing, it does work. You can hear the voiceover because the music is so quiet. But it's kind of ham-fisted to me. I feel like a lot of times that gets done because there's just no time, and whoever's working in post-production for that piece, like they just have to do whatever they can as quick as possible. And I get that. Some people have their hands tied, and that just becomes the least of their worries. They have other things to deal with. But if we do have time, and in this case, we're working a very, very short piece of music here, we can do better. I think we can do better. We can make it more finessed. The other thing, too, is, and this is something I mentioned when I talked about compression in that other episode, is that I don't want to hear all of the mixing going on. I don't want to hear the music like drastically change volumes down and then back up, because it just calls attention to it. I want it to be smooth. I want the music to play, and then I want the voiceover to cut through super clear, and I want the music to just wrap around the voiceover. And then when the voiceover is done, I want the music to just fill back in that space that we cut out for the voiceover. And I want that to all happen smoothly. So let me show you my technique, my method for doing this. So the first thing that I do is I'm going to use some sidechain compression on the music track. Now, it sounds really fancy, but it's very simple. Basically, I'm going to have a compressor that pushes down the level of the music, but the compressor is going to be triggered by the voiceover track, right? So the voiceover track, when that starts playing, that will trigger the compressor to do its thing and push down the music. So the way that I do that here in Reaper is I create a send, and I've already set this up, but I can just show you really quick. So I go to my sends for the voiceover track 2, and you can see down here in the sends box, it says send to track 1 intro music. And we're going to send all of the audio, and this is a stereo track, so the audio of 1 and 2 is going to go to a new channel on the intro music track up here, right? And this could be new channels 3 and 4. Now that's important because we want to send the information so that it triggers the compressor, but it's not going to actually play in track 1. We don't want this voiceover track to play in 2 separate tracks. It's going to stay in its own place, but it's going to be sent to additional tracks on the intro music track up here just to trigger the sidechain. So now this is Reaper specific stuff. So if you use a different DAW, it's going to look differently. The way you set it up is going to be a little bit different. The terminology is going to be different, but the idea is the same. You have to send the audio to the track that you want to use sidechain compression on. Okay, so that's going to show up here in this plugin that I'm using. This is the stock Reaper compressor called Recomp, and it's got a bunch of settings over here. But you'll notice the detector input here in the middle of the screen. Normally, it's the main input, so it's just looking at the incoming signal that you have the track on. So that would be the music track, right? But instead of using the music track as the detector input, we're going to use this auxiliary input, and that is the send that we just made from the intro or the voiceover track into the music, okay? So now we know that the compressor is going to react to the voiceover and not the music. And in terms of settings, this is something I just had to play around with for a while, but I found something that works pretty well. I'm gonna skip over this pre-comp control. We're gonna come back to that in a second, but I use a pretty fast attack, 3 milliseconds. It's not crazy fast, but it's gonna jump on. It's gonna kick in real fast, and I use a very slow release. I found somewhere between 500 milliseconds and 1 second works well. And basically that just means that when the compressor stops compressing, it's going to take a while. It's going to take a 500 milliseconds to return back to doing nothing, right? And getting out of the way. And that that just makes things smooth. If the compressor's like super, if the release time is too fast, it's going to jump around a lot. It's going to kick in and then jump out, and you're gonna have that jumpy volume that I was talking about earlier that just sounds distracting. So a slow release works really well here. Ratio, I've got a very gentle ratio here. It's just 2-to-1, right? We're not compressing the snot out of this, just very gentle compression. And then all this other stuff here you don't have to worry about. That's just kind of special stuff that Recomp has. I just left it as default setting. Okay, now I have this pre-comp setting as well. This just means that with this particular compressor, you can have it start to compress before the signal hits the compressor. Okay, so it's looking ahead in time and it's reading the incoming signal and it's starting to work a given number of milliseconds before the signal actually hits the compressor. So in this case, I found 50 milliseconds was a nice time. So basically what that means is that as this track plays, the music is going to, the voiceover is going to hit the compressor about 50 milliseconds before it actually occurs in time. And that means the music's going to start to push down before the voiceover happens. Not at the instant that the voiceover happens, but 50 milliseconds beforehand. And so that is enough time that it gets the music out of the way, but it's not so much time that it sounds really obvious. So let's just listen to what that sounds like now, okay? Here's without, and I'll kick the compressor on again. So here's without it.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick.
Okay, you see they're fighting each other. Okay, let me kick the compressor on.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength and Skinny.
Okay, so now it's sounding clearer already, right? So what I've done is I've pulled the threshold control down so that when the voiceover kicks in, the music is going to drop down about 6 dB. And you can see it's on this red meter here on the right side of the plugin. That shows you the gain reduction that the compressor is doing. So let's watch that again.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength.
Okay, there you go. So you can see that gain reduction. And if you'll listen again, notice how the gain reduction actually starts slightly before the voiceover actually kicks in. And that's that pre-comp control. It's going to kick in 50 milliseconds before the voiceover.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick.
Okay, so it did kick in early, but it's not obvious, right? You can't tell that it's kicking in really early. If I set it to a really long setting, it would be much more obvious. Let's go like 200 milliseconds.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor.
Yeah, see, it still kind of works, but now you're like, oh, the music got pushed down and then the voiceover happened. It sounds a little awkward. So 50 milliseconds to me just sounds more smooth.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick.
You can barely tell that it started pushing down. Okay, right, and then let's see the release here. So if I play to the end, you'll see that the release is nice and smooth.
In Skinny Atlas, New York.
And you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
Right, so it gives us just enough time from the end of the voiceover for that compressor to turn off, and then the drop happens, and the drop happens at full volume. And that's what we want. We want that drop to have full impact.
Radio.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so there you go. There's the sidechain compression. So already that sidechain compression is starting to clean up the clarity of the voiceover because it's pushing the music out of the way. We're not quite there yet, though. Here's another trick I like to use. Let's put an EQ on the music track. All right, I'm just using the stock Reaper plugins here. This is the Re-EQ. It comes with Reaper. I'll make that bigger. Okay, so one thing I know about the human voice is that most of the intelligibility of the voice is in the mid-range. And somewhere around like 3K, so 3,000 hertz, that's where most of the stuff that cuts through a mix is going to live. So knowing that, we can cut that out of the music, and that's going to carve this nice hole for the voiceover to cut through. So let's do that. I'm going to set my frequency to 3,000 hertz. I'm going to grab this band number 3, set it to 3,000 hertz, and let's cut like 3 dB. All right, we're going to make a small cut here. Now, I'm leaving the bandwidth at its default, which is very wide. This is a really wide band here. I don't want to make it super narrow, right? I don't want to cut just 3K out. I want to cut out a very wide section. So really what this is doing is it's cutting 3 dB at 3K, like 2 dB at 2K, and then like 1 dB at 1K, right? And then the same thing above. So it's actually cutting out a nice wide scoop for us. And this is going to allow the music to sit behind the voiceover, right? So let me disable it and then I'll kick it in so you can hear it. So this is without.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two.
Okay, let's kick it in.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan
Okay,
Strength.
let's do it with and without here. So here's without.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength in Skaneateles, New York.
And you're listening to
Okay, so it's a subtle move, but it buys us some free clarity, right? It pushes the music back a little bit without dropping it in volume that much, because the bass and the very low end, the very high end is still intact, and it's starting to wrap around the voiceover instead of just being like really quiet, right? And that's the effect that I want to hear. Is I want to hear that music sort of wrap around the voiceover and envelop you. I think it makes for a more impactful mix. Okay, so now we have a problem though, and that's that I don't want the EQ to affect the music when the voiceover is not happening, right? So I don't want this first part to be EQ'd, and I don't want the rest of it to be EQ'd. I want to hear that full range when there's no voiceover. So we need to automate this EQ so it comes in and out around where the voiceover is. So let's do that now. Let's go to our automation page for Reaper, and let's go to the re-cue here, and you can automate every part of everything in Reaper, but we just want to automate the bypass down here, right? The bypass for the EQ. So let's hit that. We've got this automation lane that popped open, and we want to turn it off by default. So let's see if I got that right. Yeah. Okay, so you see how it's not checked here, so that plugin is off here, bypassed. And then we want it to kick in at the point where the voiceover comes in. So right before the voiceover, we want that EQ to hit. Okay, so it's going to be off, 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 and then the voiceover hits, EQ kicks on and carves out that mid-range. And then same thing, when the voiceover is done, we want that EQ to turn back off, so we get back to full range. So let's do that. Okay, so you can see what that looks like. All right, let's see if we get it right. And you'll see the check mark on here. You'll see it actually kick on and off according to the automation. So let's try that.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength in Skaneateles, New York.
And you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
Yeah, and you can hear it when it comes back in here. You hear the piano gets a little bit more full range.
Scan Strength Radio.
Okay, cool. So now we've got some EQ on there. So sounding much clearer already. Now, the final bit we can do to push it a little bit further is some volume automation. So we can actually automate the volume of this music track and add more movement and push the music even further back. I don't think this is going to need a lot of volume automation, but I think we could dip it down just a little bit more and make that voiceover pop more. So let's listen to it again.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength in Skaneateles, New York.
Okay, and just to review, let's turn all of that stuff off. Let's bypass all of that.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength in Skaneateles, New York.
And you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
Okay, there we go. So yeah, it's definitely sounding much better than where we started. All right, but let's add a little bit of volume automation and take this just to the next level here. So here's a new automation lane. This is time for our volume. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn this music down just a touch, not a lot. Let's turn it down like 3 decibels, 3 dB, roughly. Yeah, 3.16 there. Okay, now what I want to do here, let me organize my tracks so you can kind of see this a little better. There we go. Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to create this fade. I want to fade the music down a little bit. I want to automate it down, but I don't want to do it like right before the voiceover hits. I actually want to do it as the voiceover is coming in. I want my fade to happen sort of over a period of time over the beginning of the voiceover. Sorry, it's kind of hard to describe what I'm talking about, but you can see it visually here. So track is going to play at full volume, full volume, full volume, and then here at this point here, then, which is just before, this point here is just before where the voiceover kicks in, and then it's not going to get down to its lowest volume until the voiceover is actually already starting. And I've just found from experience, that just makes things sound a little smoother. Again, I don't want you to really hear that the music turned down. It should be really smooth, that transition. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna come in just from the end of the voiceover here, just a little bit, and I'm going to put my automation points in here, and I'm gonna come to the outside to past the voiceover. I'm going to bring it back up, right? So now if I zoom out here, you can see that we've created a little scoop, right? So the volume's going to come down a little bit. It's going to play at that lower volume, and it's going to come back up. Let's try that.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength in Skaneateles, New York.
And you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
Okay, yeah, it's definitely clearer dropping that music down just a little bit more. Now, it's actually the fade, it's automating down a little fast for me, so I'm gonna make that a longer transition here. I want it to be a little bit smoother. So let's move the beginning of the fade point, or the automation point. I keep saying fade. That's really not good terminology. The automation point is going to start here, closer to where the voiceover is going to kick in, and I'm going to make it a longer step down before it gets down to its lowest volume. See if that's smoother.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two
I like that because it just sort of like you just heard, I'm Dan Flanick. You just heard that come through clearly, and it sort of takes you, like you don't even realize that the music's turned down.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength in Skaneateles, New York.
And you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
Okay, and likewise, I'm going to tighten this up on the back end too. One thing I've also found is that, your brain is sort of automatically completing what's being said before you even know it's said. So when you hear that,
and you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
You're listening to Scan Strength, like your brain knows that he's about to say radio. So we can actually have the music start coming up earlier, and it creates a little bit of dramatic rise along with the voice. So we can have the music basically hit full volume right at the end of when he's talking, and we can have the automation start a little earlier there. And essentially what's happening now is that the music's rising up as he's getting to the end of his phrase, and that creates a little bit more drama to it, right?
And you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
Yeah, we could tighten that up even more. Let's try this.
York.
And you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
Yeah, I like that better. Now, since we've adjusted these volume automation points, we could also finesse the EQ points. You'll notice that the EQ automation is happening sort of in the middle of this transition of the automation, somewhere in the middle. You don't want it to happen before or after the transition, but somewhere in this transition is where it's going to sound most natural. So I'm kind of leaving it right there. Same thing on the back end. I think that sounds fine. One more time.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength in Skaneateles, New York.
And you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
Okay, yeah, that's sounding really smooth to me, and the voiceover is coming through much, much, much clearer than it was before. So just for fun, let me turn off everything that I've done. I'm going to bypass everything. Here's the original.
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength in Skaneateles, New York.
And you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
Right, so it's a huge difference there, right? So
I'm Dan Flanick.
And I'm Taylor Flanick. We're two of the owners of Scan Strength in Skaneateles, New York.
And you're listening to Scan Strength Radio.
There we go. Yeah, that sounds much better. So there you go. That's how I create an intro with music and voiceover. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. This is a pretty simple example, but you can use these principles all over the place. Don't be afraid with your volume automation to let it move. So if you drop the track down 3 dB or 6 dB or whatever you need for your particular piece of music, remember it doesn't have to drop down to one level and stay at that level the whole time the voiceover is going on. If you have a longer, more complex voiceover, like for instance, you want to have music playing during a mid-roll ad. Well, a mid-roll ad may have a little bit more up and down, more dynamics to the voiceover. And so you can ride the music up and down accordingly, right? So if it gets a little quieter, drop the music down just a couple more dB. If it gets a little louder, the music can come up, and you're creating this more dynamic mix that way. But yeah, there you go. That's my method. I find that the action of the sidechain compression, along with the manual volume automation, creates a more smooth transition in and out of the voiceover, as opposed to just using volume automation by itself. Now, the last thing I'll say is that the music itself makes a huge difference. If you've got very sparse music that has a lot of space to it, doesn't have a lot of harmonic content, then yeah, you could probably get away with just volume automation, because by nature, it's not fighting the voiceover that much. But if you have a really dense track, especially with a lot of rhythmic elements, loud drums, and it's very full range, there's a lot of harmonic content to it, then you're going to have to be more aggressive with your mixing in order to create a pocket for the voiceover to sit in there. So just, use your ears. You don't have to use the exact numbers of, how I automated it in this example. That just happened to work for this piece of music. But hopefully that's helpful. Let me know in the comments if you have any other techniques that you like to use. I love to hear about what other people are doing out there with their podcasts. So take care. I'll talk to you again in a week.